Good evening. Welcome to the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. If you were here early with us, or on time with us, not early, we had some audio problems. We've got them straightened out at this point, but I'm not going to go back through 5 minutes worth of introductions or so. But I think what I'd like to do is introduce you, talk to you, tell you about our guest tonight. Our guest is Miguel Conner. Miguel wrote a book called The Voices of Gnosticism. And Miguel has his own radio call-in show. Very interesting, too. Tom will be putting that address up there for you. He does some really interesting interviews with some really good guests. You know what, Tom? I'm not getting anything in my... Okay, there we go. I just was telling Tom before the show that we were getting to where we had everything working pretty well, and everything broke very quickly for us here tonight. At any rate, Miguel interviewed several people who are real experts in the field of Gnosticism and has compiled those interviews into his book. Tom will put the address up there. Matter of fact, you can buy it right from our site there, just by clicking on the Amazon button there. And you know what? This is one of those books I really would highly recommend. So, Tom, have we got Miguel on?
We do, George.
All right, we'll bring him on in. And hey, Miguel.
Hello. How are you?
Good. Tom's going to get you up on the screen there. There we go. Well, we finally connected here. I appreciate your patience. I think we've got audio now. We ought to be able to do this show and have a good time.
No problem.
I was catching your dog in the background. You got a pretty cute dog. I got a couple of dogs I bring into the studio.
Yeah, I got a few cats too. I'm sure they'll make an appearance.
Well, they're not to be left out. That's for sure. I know that. So listen, before we get into talking about Gnosticism and some of the interesting things that you're involved in, and let's get a little background on you. You're a really interesting guy from what I see, and you're very creative in what you do with your shows. I really like what I heard and what I saw there. It's your lead in there, your half-hour lead in with your voiceovers and things. Very cool, very cool. I like it very much. Matter of fact, I may adopt some of what you do.
No, please do, please do.
So tell us about you. Where were you born, and how were you raised, and how did you get to the place where you were doing this kind of study and this kind of work?
Well, I'm originally born in Lisbon, Portugal.
Really?
I'm half Portuguese, half Irish. Moved around a lot, and from a Catholic background. Although it was always a very ecumenical Catholic background, even before ecumenical was, in with the church.
Right.
So my mom and my family were always into exploring, and I myself became a sort of a seeker, even when I was loyal to the church. Well, I still am to an extent. I still live the culture.
Right.
I would explore. So I went on a kind of a tour of different faiths. From atheism, I was a born-again Christian for 6 months. That's a lot of fun.
That was a journey I had too. It was a lot of fun.
Nothing like being a born-again Christian. You never forget that one. I went into Hinduism, Buddhism, New Age. I studied some Islam, went to the mosque and everything. And it really wasn't in doing my shopping. What personally for me, that I had was that every religion that I encountered had answers for me. And they had answers to the afterlife. They had answers to different problems. They offered coping skills, ways to be happy, ways to find peace, and all that. But again, it just came down to coping skills. And it seemed every time I would turn a corner, there's always that frying pan in your face.
Right.
And none of these religions really satisfied me or gave me the sort of shocks to my brakes to be able to stop and reflect on things. And when I began to study Gnosticism, I did have some mystical experiences or visions or revelations of whatnot. But Gnosticism really offered me what I had been looking for all my life. You know, as Carl Jung once said, when he read the Gnostics, he felt he found these friends. I felt the same way. Gnosticism didn't offer me coping skills. It didn't promise me happiness. It didn't promise me peace. It didn't say, I'd be able to live in the world. Quite the opposite. What Gnosticism offered me was a way to start questioning things. It gave me this spiritual impetus to go deeper into all these realities, deeper into myself, and deeper in all sorts of thinking ways, rational ways, irrational ways. It took me as far away, far off as I'd ever been. I mean, as one writer said, the Gnostics were probably the first spiritual off-worlders, because they really went farther than anybody in the history of mankind could go. And they did find some dark things, but they found some amazing things. And Gnosticism also answered a lot of the questions that satisfied me, the nature of evil, the nature of suffering. And again, it's almost like when I was reading the Gnostics and their scriptures, they weren't giving me answers. They were actually trying to tell me to leave them alone. They were trying to tell me, go away, because there are others that are better than you. And that made me want to, gird my loins and keep hitting this often very bizarre material.
Very bizarre material, some of it.
And the answers weren't really there, but my learning of how to question things, how to question reality, my learning of how to really start piercing into the veils of false realities and the fraud that I am, became more perfected. And they also don't offer guarantees. It's like an endless voyage, and they really don't offer any guarantees at all. They simply, it seems like they're saying, you just have to keep going. And to me, that's better than any religion I've been able to study or experience and so forth.
Well, you and I have a very similar path. I wasn't Catholic, but I certainly, was Protestant, and the things that you did, I have done. And I also found my friend in mysticism and in Gnosticism. But for our audience, let's give us your best definition of Gnosticism or Gnostic.
Ouch. That's always a hard. That's
it's tough, isn't it?
Yeah. What is Buddhism? It's
right.
very hard with Gnosticism because we don't even know who the founder is. Some people assume it's Jesus, but a lot of Gnostics didn't even think Jesus was real.
Or if there was even a founder.
Huh?
We don't even know that there was a founder.
Exactly. We don't. Some say it's Hermes Trismegistus. Some
right.
That it's Paul. Some think it's John the Baptist. Some think it's Mary Magdalene. But some of them say none of them existed. They're some sort of principles of the universe. The best I can say as quickly as possible is that the Gnostics posited that the divine or the ultimate consciousness became aware. It is similar to the Kabbalah and obviously some Hinduism.
Right.
And it began to spread out into sort of modes of thoughts or synapses, which were more like personhoods or potentials. And these had names like goodness and truth and love.
The higher principles.
Yeah, and these were called aeons, these beings that were from an idealized world. The Gnostics were Middle Platonists after all. And these aeons spread into this gigantic mind or computer that was full imagination, full creativity, and just full virtue. Now, at some point, the Gnostics assumed, and again, they're using mythology for this, that there was some sort of glitch. There was a break or a brain fart, to be honest with you. And in this brain fart, this small accident, or some say cosmic error, something false was created. They usually associated this with the fall of Sophia, which was the wisdom of God.
So at this point, are we talking about the creation or the idea of dualism? Is that connected here?
Yeah. We're talking about both.
Right.
From this eternal realm, the mind of God, or as Paul called the mind of Christ.
Right.
The part of this imperfection came out into, some say, into the void, The Gnostics were very similar to the Buddhists. They called the material world a knoma, which in Greek means emptiness, because they also believed that the universe was basically emptiness and not much. It seems science seems to corroborate this. But because of some cosmic error, the sparks or some of the energy of this divine mind, which they call the pleroma sometimes, or wholeness in Greek,
right,
became trapped in the darkness. And this sort of twisted being, a reflection of the pleroma, and they associated this with the Old Testament God, if they happen to be Jewish or Christian Gnostic, began to shape this world and create this universe, which is, again, just a bad, twisted image of the eternal realm above us. And these light sparks got trapped, and we are basically the light sparks that are trapped. This is not an illusion. This is actually a prison. Our bodies are a prison. The universe is a prison. Matter is what keeps us from returning home. And by us, I mean what the Gnostics call the divine spark, which lies in, dependent on the sect. Some sects believe the spark lied in every person. Some sects believe that the spark lied in everything, every rock, every stone. And only through knowledge, because the Gnostics believed that the greatest of sins was ignorance, any type of ignorance, but the greatest one is not knowing that we are divine, that we are trapped. And the pleroma, especially through Sophia in their mythology, sings a song to awaken this divine spark on us, or sends what we call apostles of light that came in many forms. Jesus would be one. Some of the Gnostics, the Manichaeans, thought Buddha was one of them, and Zoroaster, Hermes Trismegistos, and quite a slew of them. And their job is not to save us from sin or anything. Their job is to wake us up. In other words, their job is to give us the red pill. I always tell people, just look at the Matrix. Morpheus comes from the pleroma, gives Neo the red pill, which is gnosis. He wakes up, and then he realizes his own divinity. Obviously, it's not immediate like in Buddhism where you're enlightened.
right.
It's more like it's a long, hard journey, which I spoke about before.
So what we're really talking about here is awakening and becoming conscious and consciousness, are we not?
Yeah, not only that, but getting our mind to almost reflect the mind of the ultimate Godhead of the pleroma.
Right.
Getting the circuitry of our brain so that the energies can flow through us, and we can be, you might say, start tweeting with the pleroma, and it can start downloading information, because the Gnostics thought that, well, you don't wait till you die, but before you die, you must be crucified and resurrected and become Christ-like while you're alive.
So the Gnostics were tweeting with the God mind.
Well, those who actually listen to the divine spark,
Right.
Most of us don't.
Right. No, boy, that's for sure. Most of us don't. Well, you know what? I at some level, a long time ago, on a deep inner level, really had this concept of that we were prisoners here. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where gnosis kind of really comes in. I see myself rather than just as a Gnostic, as a mystic, and aren't all of the different sects of Gnosticism, aren't they all really mystical?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I would say that the mystical experience is part of gnosis, but it's not all gnosis.
Right.
In mysticism, you are kind of unified. You feel that sense of touch with the divine.
Right.
Gnosticism, it's also very important. One of the characteristics is self-knowledge.
Right.
Go deep within yourself, very much like Zen Buddhists do. And as you keep peeling back to yourself, you find out who you were before you were you. And you keep going back, and before you know it, there really is no you except this little grain of infinity inside of you, this eternal shining thing that belongs somewhere else. The other thing about the Gnostics that separates them maybe from mystics is that the Gnostics were they were pretty much the elite of the Christian name or any sort of faith they were in. They were poetic philosophers, so they certainly believe in in the rational mind. They believed in knowledge of all types. A lot of the Gnostic scriptures keep telling you, study your science, learn reason. And they probably got this from Plato and Socrates, because Plato and Socrates believed that through dialectics and philosophies, you can have an expanded consciousness, and it can help your mystical experience.
Well, absolutely. And his thing was know thyself.
Oh yeah, it's very important.
Hugely important. That's been a big part of my spiritual life. My spiritual growth is that. Plus, the knowingness that comes with Gnosticism, and coming to a place to trust that. How did you find that? Was that a difficult journey for you to get to where, because a lot of what we're talking about is only backed up by our own inner experience, or at least that's been how I've perceived it. How did you come to a place where you were able to trust that when, coming from your Catholic background into Gnosticism?
Well, I don't know if I've ever come to that place, because as I was telling somebody else, because they asked me, well, how do you know when you're having gnosis? I said, well, usually when the universe starts throwing everything in the kitchen sink at you.
And it's in retrospect,
right?
right?
Spiritual path, I swear there are these forces, whether they make your car break down or somebody dies, but they will throw everything at you. At the same time, in the Gnostic spirit, the Gospel of Thomas says, be a passerby. Jesus is often referred as the allogenes in Greek, which means a stranger. You feel, unlike other religions, you don't feel more connected to the world or to the earth or to other people. You feel more and more alienated. You feel
Absolutely.
more in a strange land. You find yourself going more to the fringe, even though you're still observing the world, even though you're still in the world trying to be, as much compassion and doing good work. That's another part of Gnosis. The Gnosis did believe in charity because they were very big into Paul and Jesus. But you find yourself so much more on the fringe. You relate less and less to the material world and all the seductions that it has. And at the same time, behind you, you start feeling this warmth. The divinity starts shining more and more until you are starting to reach a state of grace. But it's a multi-layered adventure inside and outside. But in the end, it's a very hard path, and you probably going to end up alone. I mean, you look at the Gnostics in history, Philip K. Dick or William Blake. You look at what happened to Jesus. You look at how lonely St. Paul was in the end. You look at
Absolutely.
Ani, these are, the people who get it. And that could be Gandhi or Martin Luther King. They're probably going to get it in the end. So if you have gnosis, expect, the life to be drastically changed, and expect things to get very hard very quickly.
Well, that certainly has been. I think that the hardness sometimes also is the thing that kind of pushes us forward, isn't it? It makes us strive for more. It's an interesting kind of a motivator, really. On some level, we're looking for relief, but the further we go into it, the less relief we get.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Well, the other thing that I'm curious about, how did you deal with what I found? Before I go into this question, tell us about, because I'm sure a lot of our viewers are not aware of Nag Hammadi and where we started to really learn about Gnostics. As I understand it, there was no pre-Christian knowledge or any awareness of Gnostics up prior to that. Am I right?
No. The church fathers, the early church fathers, in their sort of battle with the ancient Gnostics, wrote volumes on them. But that was after that. I'm talking about pre-Christian. Pre-Christian. No, we don't have really any evidence of pre-Christian Gnostics.
Right.
But some of the Nag Hammadi texts, for some reason, do not talk of Jesus. They talk about this sort of mystical savior, or they give their allegiance to Seth, the third son of Adam,
right?
Because they believe that Seth was the first real guy who got it. He was the one. He wasn't Cain and Abel. He wasn't Adam and Eve. But they thought this guy was the one who got it. They give allegiance to Seth. So this gives a little evidence about perhaps the Gnostics started out as mystic Jews
right.
who left a temple culture that had it with the whole sacrificial, being under the Greeks and the Romans. And they, very much like the Dead Sea Scrolls community, they just went on their own to find their own mystical voyage. And we also have the Hermetics, which are considered the pagan Gnostics.
Right.
And there is a possibility that they were also pre-Christian. So there is evidence that the Gnostics started before Christianity, but that's still a highly debated topic.
No real actual proof of that. So you mentioned Judaism. What kind of effect has Judaism had on Gnosticism?
Well, obviously the Gnostics were very...
They were Jews, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, one of the theories is that they began as a breakaway Jewish sect or Jewish group who decided they were going to do their own thing.
Right.
And, but the thing is that they saw the Torah as problematic. They had two things. Either they thought that Moses had misread the voice of God, and even Paul kind of alludes to that in his epistle.
Right.
Or that demonic beings were talking to him, or that just Moses just dropped the ball. So what the Gnostics loved doing was rewriting. I mean, the Gnostics reinterpreted everything that came in their way. They would pump out gospels, and the church fathers complained about it because, they were just rewriting things and putting names in. So they pretty much reinterpreted the Torah to create this pre-creation creation with the aeons and stuff. And they change all these stories around, and sometimes they created parodies. Many years before the atheist movement and the Enlightenment blog, the Gnostics were already saying, this Sodom and Gomorrah story really sucks.
Ain't happening.
So we're going to rewrite it where an angel comes and saves all the gays. Or,
right.
the Noah thing is really stupid, it's terrible. So we're going to rewrite that story. And, it's not like they didn't take things literally, but they felt if they kept rewriting it, plus, which, exercising their creativity in a sort of self-therapy, plus the mystical ceremonies that they had, they would find the truth of the reality behind the reality. They would find out who the man behind the curtain is and who the man behind that curtain is, and hopefully get to the ultimate source.
The God behind the God.
Yeah, or as I call him, the God above God.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, there's not much reason why there shouldn't be some kind of a God between us and the ultimate God. We have a hard enough time trying to comprehend a God, let alone the God behind a God.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Gnostics posited that the ultimate source was basically pure information, pure consciousness. It was not. It created, but in an abstract sense, and therefore there had to be some sort of intermediary God. And obviously Jehovah of the Old Testament, but they take swipes at all the other gods. To them, if you're working within time and space, you're working in the temporal and the cyclical, and you're really not worth it. Many of the Gnostic texts say, no, you don't want to be like a god. You want to be better than a god.
Outside of that whole concept, well, who's bigger, God or the God makers?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And again, there's no stopping. I was reading one of the Nag Hammadi texts, and they actually talk about there is a God above God above God called the silent unknown one. So I think the Gnostics probably got eliminated before they even had reached these incredible boundaries. They were like on the Enterprise going to the end of the universe. I don't think there was an end to where they were going, and there probably would never be. There's always going to be a higher level of divinity, just like there's a deeper level of you, and there's no end. And why should there be an end? Why should the adventure ever end?
Well, and if you think about it, it really has to be that way. If infinity is truly infinity, then, God would be a stopping place in infinity. And so,
yeah, why stop knowing Him?
Yeah, so it must be bigger and stronger. So we didn't know a lot about Gnostics except through actually they're Christian enemies, really, before Nag Hammadi, did we?
Yeah, through the church fathers.
Yeah.
The pagans didn't like him. The Buddhists didn't like him. The Taoists didn't like him. The Muslims didn't like them. So the Gnostics always had to be underground, or else it'd basically get pushed aside or worse. But the Nag Hammadi was discovered in 1945. Oddly, the same year we dropped the bomb in Hiroshima, which is almost ironic because you and I are talking about this on such a day when, the nuclear war is going to start again.
Right.
But it wasn't translated until 1979. And as far as I know, we only have English translation. So basically, we've got about 30 years of studying these texts when other religions, whether it's the Bible or the Talmud or the Rig Veda, they've got thousands of years. So we have only just begun understanding the Gnostics. It's only begun. That's why I find it so exciting, too, because I feel like I'm part of something really amazing these people are trying to tell us.
Well, there's no question in my mind that you are definitely a part of that, Miguel. Yeah, for sure. And how did you come across? How did you happen to connect up with Elaine Pagels?
Excuse me. Oh well, just like anything. I mean, I think I always like to say that it's Providence that Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio started, because when I started, I had no experience and I had barely any equipment. But whenever I used to call, I would, for example, call Bart Ehrman, who was, a bestseller, the guy appears on the Colbert Report and all these documents. Right. And I would call him, and he'd simply say, yeah, let's do it. I would call, the translators of the Nag Hammadi, and they'd say, yeah, let's do it. I would call somebody like Timothy Freak, who's a best-selling author.
Have you got a contact with Timothy? He had, one of his first books I have searched for, tried to get to, and I would really like to interview Timothy.
Yeah. I mean, it's not too hard.
I just
go to his website. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Well, most of these people aren't they? They're like real down to earth, just good people.
Oh, they're great because let's face it. All the guests and all the people up here in Voices of Gnosticism, and as the writer, I know it really takes all your soul just to write a book and publish it and research it. Some of these scholars have been translating these lost gospels for 30 years.
Right.
They've basically, any kind of ego or arrogance, they've lost it. I mean, they are into their work, and they want to share this work, and they want the truth to let out. So they're all great. I mean, Elaine Pagels the same way. I called her. She was very busy because she was on doing these tours to Europe and doing research. But as soon as she gets back, she just called me up and said, yes, I want to talk about Gnosticism.
Well,
so,
I've been very lucky. She actually was invited to edit the newfound Gospel of Judas. Is that correct?
No, she was not part of the National Geographic team. That was Marvin Meyer, who's been in the show, and a few others. She and Karen Cake did write a book on the Gospel of Judas. But
I thought I read in your book that she had been asked to actually edit or the Gospel of Judas. I probably read it wrong.
No, she was.
Okay, all right. So the find was Nag Hammadi find was found by just kind of a peasant, wasn't it? And he started destroying the.
Yeah, it was a fight between brothers, and it ended up in a woman's. It was found in a jar of clay. It's assumed that in the 4th century, these texts were kept by monks. Back then, the monks were basically the internet of the world. They saved everything up. But there was a decree by Pope Anastasius. I know I'm saying his name. And he had already decided what was going to go in the Bible and what was not.
Right.
So to assume one of these monks threw these texts in a jar of clay, buried it, and for almost 2,000 years it just stayed there in Egypt. And then these peasants found it, and and eventually pieces of it were actually acquired, sold through the black market, and given. I mean, Carl Jung got a piece of one of the Gnostic texts
off the black market. He bought that off the black market, didn't he? The codice that he bought.
He had a colleague get it for him, the Gospel of Truth.
Right.
He was always, that was the one he had felt a lot of passion for. But eventually these texts were able to get together and translate it. And again, a generation later it was published, and we've only just begun with the Nag Hammadi library. And obviously you have the other texts like the Gospel of Judas. The Gospel of Mary wasn't part of the Nag Hammadi library. That was actually found separately.
Gospel of Thomas was part of that.
Yeah, that was found in the Nag Hammadi.
Right.
Nag Hammadi library in Coptic, but there's also a Greek translation that was also found in Egypt. So we just keep popping up.
One of the things, Miguel, that I find really interesting about, if these were Catholics, or if they were Baptists, or if they were Hindus, or some particular sect, what they would have stored would have been congruent, and the codices in the Nag Hammadi are pretty contradictory on a lot of levels, from what I can see.
Yeah, well, again, there's a lot of new research coming out, and scholars are seeing that they aren't as chaotic. It's not like the guy just stuffed things up like in a suitcase while, the men in black were banging on the door or something.
Well, it looks like that there was some real thought put into the whole thing, but
yeah. I mean, they're finding out that there is actually a sort of system to it, because each of the sections has a secret book of John, which is considered the main Gnostic gospel.
Right. And
they're finding out, like, the first section has to do with, basic teaching. And then there's another section they realize is catechism. Another section is sort of Neoplatonic philosophy mixed in with Hermeticism. So they are finding there is sort of a system to the Nag Hammadi library. They're not exactly sure yet what it is, and different theories are going around. So it's not as chaotic as people think.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. Well, you make a really valid point in the fact that we've had very few years compared to the other scriptural documents that are available for other beliefs to really know what's there, and it's a real discovery process going on even today.
Yeah, and it's very exciting. I mean, because now a lot of work has been done, because there are some Gnostic texts which they call the Platonizing texts, and it seems to be just the dialogue of a teacher, this unnamed teacher, and his student, and he's talking about the different heavens and passwords and what the universe is made about and how it came about. And people are starting to find that there are actually coded rituals and praxis within these things. These are actually, they're just not dialogue, they are mystical texts. And they're just now starting to find out what these mystical texts are and how to apply them to create higher states of consciousness. So again, it's very exciting. There's so much. I mean, we've only hit the topsoil when it comes to the Gnostics.
So most of what you get that's new comes from scholars that have published books, or you belong to some kind of organizations that.
Well, I mean, I keep in touch with a lot of the scholars. I have friends who are very involved in the Gnostic community, graduate students, people who have been studying this for years on their own. And we sort of, exchange ideas. I keep my ears open and just try to learn as I go. I'm not obviously a scholar. I like to think myself as like Socrates. I like to midwife things out of people. And keep these things out to the world and let them see what they do. So, but I try to stay abreast of things.
So one of the other things I saw that you were interested in, and I kind of wanted to see how this fits in Gnosticism, was the idea of multiple realities.
Mm-hmm.
Does that connect up with Gnosticism, or is that just something that you did?
Oh, no. I mean, that definitely plays into Gnosticism, because the Gnostics, I always like to call them the first conspiracy theorists, or the secret society of secret societies, because secret societies were so enamored by them because of their attitude of fierce inquiry. But they were the ones who said, this reality is not an illusion, but it's a prison. And behind that reality, there's probably another reality that we have to get to.
Okay.
And that still won't be there, and we must keep going. And this plays in very well with, for example, Philip K. Dick is very hot right now. He was the one whose big question was always, what is reality and what it is to be a human being? And he was the one who actually came up with the concept, the reality behind the reality, which most of his works do, or what makes us a human being. Again, The Matrix is a perfect movie that really shows that translates the Gnostic spirit pretty well, or The Truman Show, or Inception.
Right.
It seems more and more of these movies are coming out, and I'm not saying people are embracing Gnosticism. I think Gnosticism is embracing people because we're finding more and more that all our leaders, religious leaders, political leaders, civic leaders, corporations, banks, nations, they're all false. And there's somebody behind them pulling the strings.
Yep.
And we need to find out who's pulling the strings, and we'll probably find out there's somebody pulling their strings. And it goes all the way up, well, to the Gnostics, it goes all the way up to God. He's up there, making a mess out of things.
Well, that the proof is right at our. We can look around and see it if we're willing to, to admit that, things can be a real mess down here.
I think people are finally starting to open their eyes. They're not just accepting reality for what they're given, imposed reality. They're saying, no, we need to look behind things.
See, what I believe is happening in that process is that our consciousness, as humanity's consciousness, is beginning to expand. There were centuries where it was pretty flat and it wasn't going anywhere. And I think I think, Miguel, this is where science really plays in. Science has shown us so much of what we believe to be impossible. And, it's like, we begin to have to question some of what we've been told as far as religion is concerned as being absolutes, and they're not. And I think you mentioned somewhere in here that much of this is based on mythicism. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, are we at a place where we need to create new myths ourselves? In other words, with science pointing the error, the erroneousness in some of the old myths, do these old myths still work for us?
It was certainly Joseph Campbell.
Right.
Yes, he was a big proponent of that. I would certainly agree to an extent. Again, we look at the myth of the Matrix, there's several myths
right
working today. For example, the rise of the machines. That's one of the newest myths, and unfortunately, the machines have risen, and we are dependent on them, and they are ruling our lives.
And this is only the beginning.
Yeah, this is only the beginning. I think the Gnostics would say that, no, things aren't going to get better. In the end, there's either the material world or the spiritual world. You can help awaken those and lead them out to a better place, and obviously help the downtrodden physically. But in the end, the material world is going to win. There's no need to think that humankind is going to get better. Why? Because we've got 100,000 years to prove that. And I think that's one reason Gnosticism will never be popular, because that's the stance it takes. And I think it's the honest response.
Well, there's another difficulty with Gnosticism as far as following it, especially, as you said, you end up alone, is because in order to follow it, you have to leave people behind that you love. Mm-hmm. And most people aren't willing to do that.
No. It's funny. We can read the story of Buddha, who had to say goodbye to his wife and child because he was going on the greatest quest of all, to find a way to end suffering.
Right.
You can read the story of Jesus, who leaves his family, and his townspeople call him crazy. We can read all these great stories, yet we don't expect to go through them.
Absolutely.
These myths, whether it's Neo or Jesus or Buddha or Krishna, they're telling us that we need to go on our own journey, say goodbye to everything we thought was real or safe, and go into some very uncharted territories where we might end up crucified or shot from a hotel room. It's all right there in the stories. What makes you think you're better than the stories?
Well, that's an interesting point right there, and it may be one of the biggest blocks to all of this, and that's the ego. What parts the ego play in all of this as far as blocking us?
Well, the ego, I guess the Gnostics had a name for it. They called it the counterfeit spirit.
Right.
Which is what robs us of our free will, robs us of our heroic self. It's the part of us that wants to play it safe, that wants us to choose Apple products and Lexuses and big screen TVs, and doesn't want us to explore the metaphysical and the eternal. So the ego is certainly, it would certainly be a problem in the Gnostic worldview, like in other faiths.
Well, also, I think the ego is kind of thought of as the mother of lying, really. Of dishonesty, mental lying, and self-honesty. They're a real problem as far as spiritual growth is concerned, aren't they?
Right. I mean, in kind of Jungian Gnosticism, the crux or that moment of revelation, the Gnostics is, I think it's in the book of Isaiah, where God says, "I am the only God. There is no God but me. I am a jealous God." And the Gnostics, in their scriptures say, wait a second, but why would you say that unless there were other gods? And
right.
Why would you be jealous if you're omnipotent, omniscient?
What's there to be jealous of, right?
Yeah, and our ego is the same way. Our ego thinks that we are the only God, that only we matter, and we're very jealous of what we have. We're jealous of our relationship, our possessions. We are, each one of us has a little Jehovah, a little Allah. Forget Satan. Satan might be a step up, but we have this creator dominating God inside of us. The Hermetics used to say, "As above, so below."
Right.
And right.
Well, it says that in Christian scripture, as I think in some of Paul's writings, if I remember right, as above.
Well, I mean, it says, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it in heaven." But,
right.
As above, so below. That's from Hermes Trismegisto.
Gotcha. So where's the concept, the idea of reincarnation play in Gnosticism, or does it?
Well, the Gnostics were always pretty. They're almost like they would tack on the answers of what happens when you die, because they were so vehement about you finding gnosis and that Christ-like state in this world. It's almost like they tacked it on, or in one scripture, John might ask Jesus about this, and he kind of says, "Well, you might do this, you might do that in the afterlife, but let's focus on the story and what you need to do." Some Gnostic sects did believe in reincarnation. They had different views. Some believed in simply human to human. The Manichaeans and the Cathars, who both believed that you could be reincarnated as anything, as an animal or a plant. Therefore, they were completely pacifist and vegetarian. So they had varied views. The Gnostics would always speculate and leave things open.
So you mentioned the Cathars. They were, as I understand it, kind of wiped out by the Catholic Roman Church, were they not?
Yes, they were. And in fact, probably a fact most people don't know about, the term heresy,
right.
Heresy hunter, and that whole idea where you're actually persecuted for your thoughts, which didn't happen in ancient times, was created by the early church against the Gnostics. Now, the Inquisition, it was not started against Jews or witches or pagans or anything. The Inquisition
was the Cathars,
set up on purpose to wipe out the Cathars. And, it more than succeeded. The problem is once you create this mechanism, it needs to eat.
Absolutely.
So when the machine ate the Cathars, it moved on to the Jews and the women and the gays and all the other minorities, the defenseless ones.
The easy prey, low-hanging fruit. Well, the problem with egos, as on a real practical level, is that egos need to eat other egos just to survive. Mm-hmm. And you see it in action all the time. So it was, again, bringing back to Joseph Campbell, he was the one who said, and he would almost have this glint in his eye, but he would say, why did somebody create a universe where to survive every living creature needs to eat
another living creature and very often make it suffer. And that's almost the mechanism of the universe. It's almost like everything has to eat everything. And the Gnostics would say, well, what kind of bizarre intelligence would start the universe like that? Was it, even if it's evolution, it's a joke. It's terrible. As one Gnostic bishop, Stephen Heller, once said, the first sound of the universe wasn't om, it was munch. And we're all eating each other, we're all looking over our shoulders, and we're all prey. Not just, like you said, it goes beyond the physical, it's the mental, the emotional. It's, that's why the Gnostic said this is a very defective universe that could have been built a little bit better. He shouldn't have taken that seventh day off.
Well, yeah. Well, the thing that's interesting to me is that, if God is perfection, how did this happen?
Well, that's a question that obviously, I admit that there will always be holes in any religion.
Right.
If you explore it far enough. To the Gnostics, obviously there was a cosmic error, although some didn't see it as a cosmic error. They simply saw it as a natural way of God understanding himself. I personally believe that, or from my revelation, there was a cosmic error. Because, after all, perfection, when you look at the etymology of perfection, it simply means completion. And that which must complete itself. So in a sense, this whole thing maybe is part of this gigantic completion trap. And again, if you have, like some Gnostics said, you have the spiritual world and the material world. The spiritual world is not going to get involved into the material world, even though the material world may hunger for what the spirit has, all that light. So when the material world has had these light sparks trapped in it, the spiritual world isn't going to fight or do violence or do anything because it doesn't involve itself in the material world. What it can do is send information to us, awaken our divine spark, and show us our way home. So to me, that is really the closest or one of the best answers to the problem of evil and suffering and how perfection could allow, this world we live in.
So I'll tell you, Miguel, this hour has flown by, and we're down to the last couple of minutes. And before we go, is there anything that you would like to? And Tom's going to put out about where to find your book and also your radio show. Anything you'd like? Anything we missed that you feel is important that you'd like to kick in here in the last minute or so?
Oh dear, there's so many issues we didn't cover.
In an hour, there's no way we could do it. So it's.
What I always tell people on Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio is I always tell them write your own gospel and live your own myth, because the Gnostics, what they did is they wrote their gospels and they wrote their gospels, and somehow by writing their gospels, they were able to find their creative aspect and their divinity, because they were writing in the names of other people. Living your own myth is you have to find yourself in the story that you want to start. Like William Blake said, if a man does not create his own system, then another man will create his own system for him.
Oh boy, that's for sure.
Make your own system, live your own system, or else God will find a ghostwriter for you. The choice is yours.
And I wonder if that statement that God made man in His image shouldn't be God made man in His imagination.
Well, again, God just kind of didn't make things well. It seems, He
right.
rested on that seventh day.
Right.
So, but we are in His image. We are brutal carnivores who love to conquer, destroy Earth, and for some strange reason hurt each other emotionally.
Well, we've got that down very well.
I don't know.
Well, listen, we're going to have to do this again. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I look forward to talking with you in the future. And thank you for taking an hour out and being with us tonight.
Well, thank you, George, and thank you for having me on. I enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure meeting you. I look forward to having a cup of coffee with you one of these days.
Hey, likewise. Anytime, my friend.
Okay. You have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye. Well, it's been an interesting night for me, a topic that I've been interested in for 30 years, and I'm certainly not as not as educated as Miguel is. Miguel really knows his stuff. And Tom, you put up his radio show?
Absolutely.
Boy, I'll tell you what, you ought to catch some of those shows. He's got some, in the archives, there's some interesting things that if you enjoyed this show, I guarantee you'll enjoy what you find on his site. So we're out of time. Remember, next week I've got Nothing Short of Joy. It'll be a great show. We'll have a good time. So come back next Tuesday, and hopefully we'll have good audio, good video, and a good evening. So in the meantime, don't forget to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week. You're going to take us off, Tom?